Saint Augustine on the Most Holy Trinity, Book 10, Chapter 8 and following. Chapter 8, Different Modes of Conceiving. But since the eye of the mind can't look at all things together in one glance, which the memory retains, these trinities of thought alternate in a series of withdrawals and successions, and so that trinity becomes more innumerably numerous, and yet not infinite, if it pass not beyond the number of things stored up in the memory. For although we begin to reckon from the earliest perception which anyone has of material things through any bodily sense, and even take in also those things which he has forgotten, yet the number would undoubtedly be certain and determined, although innumerable. For we not only call infinite things innumerable, but also those which, although finite, exceed anyone's power of reckoning. But we can hence perceive a little more clearly that what the memory stores up and retains is a different thing from that which is thence copied in the conception of the man who remembers, although, when both are combined together, they appear to be one and the same, because we can only remember just as many species of bodies as we have actually seen, and so great and such as we have actually seen. For the mind imbibes them into the memory from the bodily sense, whereas the things seen in conception, although drawn from those things which are in the memory, yet are multiplied and varied innumerably, and altogether without end. For I remember no doubt but one sun, because according to the fact I have seen but one. But if I please, I conceive of two or three, or as many as I will, but the vision of my mind, when I conceive of many, is formed from the same memory by which I remember one. And I remember it just as large as I saw it. For if I remember it as larger or smaller than I saw it, then I no longer remember what I saw, and so I do not remember it. But because I remember it as large as I saw it, yet I conceive of it as greater or as less according to my will, and I remember it as I saw it, but I conceive of it as running its course as I will, and as standing still where I will, and as coming whence I will, and whither I will. For it is in my power to conceive of it as square, although I remember it as round, and again of what color I please, although I have never seen and therefore do not remember a green sun. And as the sun, so all other things. But owing to the corporeal and sensible nature of these forms of things, the mind falls into error when it imagines them to exist without, in the same mode in which it conceives them within, either when they have already ceased to exist without, but are still retained in the memory, or when, in any other way also, that which we remember is formed in the mind, not by faithful recollection, but after the variations of thoughts. Yet it very often happens that we believe also a true narrative, told us by others, of things which the narrators have themselves perceived by their senses. And in this case, when we conceive the things narrated to us as we hear them, the eye of the mind does not seem to be turned back to the memory in order to bring up visions in our thoughts. For we do not conceive these things from our own recollection, but upon the narration of another. And that Trinity does not here seem to come to its completion, which is made when the species lying hid in the memory and the vision of the man that remembers are combined by will as a third. For I do not conceive that which lay hid in man that remembers, for I do not conceive that which lay hid in my memory, but that which I hear when anything is narrated to me. I am not speaking of the words themselves of the speaker, lest anyone should suppose that I have gone off to that other Trinity, which is transacted without, in sensible things, or in the senses, but I am conceiving of those species of material things which the narrator signifies to me by words and sounds, which species certainly I conceive of not by remembering, but by hearing. But if we consider the matter more carefully, even in this case, the limit of the memory is not overstepped. For I could not even understand the narrator if I did not remember generically the individual things of which he speaks, even although I then hear them for the first time as connected together in one tale. For he who, for instance, describes to me some mountain stripped of timber and clothed with olive trees, describes it to me who remembers the species both of mountains and of timber and of olive trees. And if I had forgotten these, I should not know at all of what he was speaking, and therefore could not conceive that description. And so it comes to pass that everyone who conceives things corporeal, whether he himself imagine anything or hear or read, either a narrative of things past or a foretelling of things future, has recourse to his memory and finds there the limit and measure of all the forms at which he gazes in his thought. For no one can conceive at all either a color or a form of body which he never saw, or a sound which he never heard, or a flavor which he never tasted, or a scent which he never smelt, or any touch of a corporeal thing which he never felt. But if no one conceives anything corporeal except what he has sensuously perceived, because no one remembers anything corporeal except what he has thus perceived, then, as is the limit of perceiving in bodies, so is the limit of thinking in the memory. For the sense receives the species from that body which we perceive, and the memory from the sense, but the mental eye of the concipient from the memory. Further, as the will applies the sense to the bodily object, so it applies the memory to the sense and the eye of the mind of the concipient to the memory. But that which harmonizes those things and unites them, itself also disjoints and separates them, that is, the will. But it separates the bodily senses from the bodies that are to be perceived by movement of the body, either to hinder our perceiving the thing, or that we may cease to perceive it, as when we avert our eyes from that which we are unwilling to see, or shut them, so again the ears from sounds, or the nostrils from smells. So also we turn away from tasters, either by shutting the mouth, or by casting the thing out of the mouth. In touch also we either remove the bodily thing, that we may not touch what we do not wish, or if we were already touching it, we fling or push it away. Thus the will acts by movement of the body, so that the bodily sense shall not be joined to the sensible things. And it does this according to its power, for when it endures hardships in so doing, on account of the condition of slavish mortality, then torment is the result in such wise that nothing remains to the will save endurance. But the will averts the memory from the sense, when, through its being intent on something else, it does not suffer things present to cleave to it. As anyone may see, when often we do not seem to ourselves to have heard someone who was speaking to us because we were thinking of something else. But this is a mistake, for we did hear, but we do not remember, because the words of the speaker presently slipped out of the perception of our ears through the bidding of the will being diverted elsewhere, by which they are usually fixed in the memory. Therefore, we should say more accurately in such a case, we do not remember than we did not hear, for it happens even in reading, and to myself very frequently, that when I have read through a page or an epistle, I do not know what I have read, and I begin it again. For the purpose of the will being fixed on something else, the memory was not so applied to the bodily sense as the sense itself was applied to the letters. So too, anyone who walks with the will intent on something else does not know where he has got to. For if he had not seen, he would not have walked thither, or would have felt his way in walking with greater attention, especially if he was passing through a place he did not know, yet, because he walked easily, certainly he saw, but because the memory was not applied to the sense itself in the same way as the sense of the eyes was applied to the places through which he was passing, he could not remember at all even the last thing he saw. Now, to will to turn away the eye of the mind from that which is in the memory is nothing else but not to think thereupon. Chapter 9. Species is produced by species in succession. In this arrangement, then, while we begin from the bodily species and arrive finally at the species which comes to be in the intuition of the concipient, we find four species born, as it were, step by step, one from the other, the second from the first, the third from the second, the fourth from the third, since from the species of the body itself there arises that which comes to be in the sense of the percipient, and from this that which comes to be in the memory, and from this that which comes to be in the mind's eye of the concipient. And the will, therefore, thrice combines, as it were, parent with offspring, first the species of the body with that to which it gives birth in the sense of the body, and that again with that which from it comes to be in the memory, and this also, thirdly, with that which is born from it in the intuition of the concipient's mind. But the intermediate combination, which is the second, although it is near to the first, is yet not so like the first as the third is. For there are two kinds of vision, the one of perception, the other of conception. But in order that the vision of conception may come to be, there is what for the purpose in the memory, from the vision of sensuous perception, something like it, to which the eye of the mind may turn itself in conceiving, as the glance of the eyes turns itself sensuously perceiving to the bodily object. I have therefore chosen to put forward two trinities in this kind. One, when the vision of sensuous perception is formed from the bodily object. The other, when the vision of conception is formed from the memory. But I have refrained from commending an intermediate one, because we do not commonly call it vision when the form which comes to be in the sense of him who perceives is entrusted to the memory. Yet, in all cases, the will does not appear unless as the combiner, as it were, of parent and offspring, and so proceed from whence it may, it can be called neither parent nor offspring. Chapter 10. The imagination also adds even to things we have not seen, those things which we have seen elsewhere. But if we do not remember except what we have sensuously perceived, nor conceive except what we remember, why do we often conceive things that are false, when certainly we do not remember falsely those things which we have perceived, unless it be because that will which I have already taken pains to show as much as I can to be the uniter and the separator of things of this kind leads the vision of the conceiver, that is, to be formed after its own will and pleasure through the hidden stores of the memory. And in order to conceive, imagine those things which we do not remember, impels it to take one thing from hence and another from thence, from those which we do remember, and these things combining into one vision make something which is called false, because it either does not exist externally in the nature of corporeal things, or does not seem copied from the memory, in that we do not remember that we ever saw such a thing. For who ever saw a black swan? And therefore no one remembers a black swan. Yet who is there that can conceive it? For it is easy to apply to that shape which we have come to know by seeing it, a black color, which we have not the less seen in other bodies, and because we have seen both, we remember both. Neither do I remember a bird with 4 feet, because I never saw one, but I contemplate such a fantasy very easily by adding to some winged shape such as I have seen, to other feet such as I have likewise seen. And therefore, in conceiving conjointly what we remember to have seen singly, we seem not to conceive that which we remember, while we really do this under the law of the memory, whence we take everything which we join together after our own pleasure in manifold and diverse ways. For we do not conceive even the very magnitudes of bodies, which magnitudes we never saw, without help of the memory. For the measure of space to which our gaze commonly reaches through the magnitude of the world is the measure also to which we enlarge the bulk of bodies, whatever they may be, when we conceive them as great as we can. And reason indeed proceeds still beyond, but fantasy does not follow her, as when reason announces the infinity of number also, which no vision of him who conceives according to corporeal things can apprehend. The same reason also teaches that the most minute atoms are infinitely divisible. Yet, when we have come to those slight and minute particles which we remember to have seen, then we can no longer behold phantasms more slender and more minute, although reason does not cease to continue to divide them. So we conceive no corporeal things except either those we remember or from those things which we remember. Chapter 11. Number, weight, measure. But because those things which are impressed on the memory singly can be conceived according to number, measure seems to belong to the memory, but number to the vision, because although the multiplicity of such visions is innumerable, yet a limit not to be transgressed is prescribed for each in the memory. Therefore, measure appears in the memory, number in the vision of things, as there is some measure in visible bodies themselves, to which measure the sense of those who see is most numerously adjusted, and from one visible object is formed the vision of many beholders, so that even a single person sees commonly a single thing under a double appearance, on account of the number of his two eyes, as we have laid down above. Therefore, there is some measure in those things whence visions are copied, but in the visions themselves there is number. But the will which unites and regulates these things and combines them into a certain unity, and does not quietly rest its desire of sensuously perceiving or of conceiving, except in those things from whence the visions are formed, resembles weight. And therefore, I would just notice by way of anticipation these three things: measure, number, weight, which are to be perceived in all other things also. In the meantime, I have now shown as much as I can, and to whom I can, that the will is the uniter of the visible thing and of the vision, as it were of parent and of offspring, whether in sensuous perception or in conception, and that it can't be called either parent or offspring. Wherefore time admonishes us to seek for this same Trinity in the inner man, and to strive to pass inwards from that animal and carnal, and, as he is called, outward man, of whom I have so long spoken. And here we hope to be able to find an image of God according to the Trinity, he himself helping our efforts, who, as things themselves show, and as Holy Scripture also witnesses, has regulated all things in measure and number and weight. Book of Wisdom, chapter 9, verse 28.